questions. So today, when you ask a question for our presenters, please go ahead and use the Q&A button that's located at the bottom of your screen. That Q&A button is a place where you can actually ask your question, and it will be all in one nice place for our speakers, and you guys can upvote each other's questions. So if you see something that you really want to get answered, make sure to upvote it. Today's session is being recorded, and the link will be sent out to you guys tomorrow, and you can go ahead and share that with your friends, your colleagues. Maybe there's somebody that you know that wanted to join today's call but didn't get the chance. Don't worry, we've got the recording on its way to you tomorrow. So today we're going to be talking about embracing cloud applications in the privacy era. What is the Hive think tank? The Hive think tank is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. We are bringing you events and content. We're doing events about every other week. Sometimes we're doing them every week. Sometimes we have to space them out a little bit. It just really depends on what we've got going on. So the most important thing you can do today is make sure to subscribe to the Hive think tank's meetup page. That's the best way to find out about all of our events. And if you're going to be tweeting or going on social with this program, go ahead and use the hashtag HiveData or tag us at HiveData. We love following along with you guys. And then if you want to get in contact with me about sponsorship, that's my email. I'll drop it in the chat. We really appreciate our sponsors, and we would love to work with you if that is something you're interested in. And without further ado, here's Ravi, but make sure to sign up for our upcoming event on API risks, leaky cauldrons of digital transformation. I am going to go ahead and drop that link for you guys so you can go ahead and get enrolled in that. We just opened that up for registration within the hour, so you can be one of the first to sign up for that event. All right, thanks, Ravi.
Thank you, Maddie. And I'm very pleased today to be hosting the event today. And I'll come to that. But first, briefly about the Hive. The Hive is a venture studio that is focused on leveraging data and AI to drive transformation across a broad set of industries. So we've been doing this since 2012, and the focus is really on collaborating with entrepreneurs, and in some cases, corporations, to help start companies. So we've done 29 companies so far since late 2012, 1 IPO, 7 exits, a number of companies in the 100+ million valuation. And so if you are an entrepreneur and are interested in going down the journey, we are keen to hear from you. Today's event, if you are going to be, if you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag HiveData so others can join in on the conversation. With that, I'd like to introduce my friends Ray Everett and Chris Babel. Chris is the CEO of TrustArc, a good friend of the Hive, and Ray Everett is the Chief Privacy Intelligence Officer of Data Secrets. Ray also has the unique distinction of being the first ever Chief Privacy Officer, the first person to ever have that title. Ray, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ravi. Appreciate it. As he mentioned, my name is Ray Everett. I'm the Chief Privacy Intelligence Officer at Data Secrets. Data Secrets is a privacy technology company focused on helping businesses stay ahead of their data protection risks, particularly those that arise from how data moves within complex distributed data environments. Part of my job is to keep track of all the laws and regulations across the industry that companies have to follow, and the things that you worry about when you're managing those risks, particularly in data-driven companies, when you're dependent on cloud and SaaS providers. Over the last 20 years, I've been a privacy leader in a number of big companies, and I've been a consultant and advisor for many, many more. And I'm particularly excited about today's topic because it's one of those issues and sources of nightmares for me over the last 20 years or so. Let me give a quick introduction to the topic here and to set the stage for our conversation. Cloud-based applications and services are really the lifeblood of today's modern enterprise. These applications share your company's critical, most sensitive data across sprawling data ecosystems. Data is always moving between and among your partners, vendors, and all of the service providers that make up the backbone of today's data-driven businesses. The sensitive data managed by an enterprise is only as safe as the weakest application or the least protected API in that ecosystem. And so to run a successful data governance and risk management program, you really have to understand things like your data sources, your risk lineage, and all of the compliance triggers that affect your organization. But more than just understanding them, you have to be able to manage them. And to talk today about the challenges of understanding and managing risk in today's complicated environment, we're turning to my old friend and colleague, Chris Babel. He's the CEO at TrustArc. It's a role he's had since 2010, and during which he's led the company through significant growth and transformation into becoming a leading global privacy, compliance, and risk management company. Chris is a thought leader and speaks frequently at major industry events. He's also a frequent commentator in the news media on privacy matters, and you've probably seen his name in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and on network news and the like. Before joining TrustArc, Chris spent over a decade building online trust, most recently in the security industry as Senior Vice President and General Manager of VeriSign's worldwide authentication services business. And Chris also previously managed VeriSign's SSL and managed security services businesses and managed a lot of their acquisition and expansion activities, particularly across EMEA and Asia. In full disclosure, Chris is a friend and a colleague and a former boss of mine. He hired me about 7 years ago to help build some of the first components of the TrustArc privacy platform, and then asked me to build out the consulting services practice there at TrustArc. He was one of the very first people I turned to talk about data secrets and the ideas and concepts. And so I'm particularly pleased and excited to be joined by him today to talk about these issues. And that's where I want to start. When we're talking about data protection, how serious are the risks arising from third parties, from service providers, cloud applications, and so forth?
Well, thanks for the introduction first. It's great to be back on and collaborating with you and doing sessions like this. We miss having you at TrustArc, but glad to be doing this with you. It's been an interesting journey kind of watching this problem evolve over the last both 10 years of being kind of privacy focused, as well as 10 years prior to that being security focused. And I think as we talk through a lot of these things today, and it's already kind of one of the similar questions out there, which is how related are privacy and security, but I think a lot of the perspectives I'll give kind of cross the line between those two things. And when we specifically talk about kind of the issues of risk with third parties, service providers, cloud applications, I think a whole bunch of things are coming together at the same time. First, we know the explosion of data, everyone knows that, but the privacy risks and kind of security risks really holding back some of that data usage from maximizing its value inside an organization to drive things like business growth, expansion, better customer experiences, et cetera. And what we see kind of more and more is a focus on how you're handling the data, how you're careful with the data, how you're thinking about risk rather than just compliance with the data. And I'd say generally we're making good progress, but I'll say that I continue to really be almost shockingly surprised by how much of this is still driven by what I call the lightning bolt. And in security world, that's the breach of someone that you know or is in your space that, you know, in some cases affects like the valuation of all companies in your market segment because someone was breached. And everyone likes to go back to like the Target one, say it was the HVAC vendor, whatever it was. But the point just being is that our IT infrastructure is becoming so incredibly complex that any, as you said, loose link in the chain is then the weakest link across your entire environment. And we just keep seeing time and time again these breaches causing a lot of activity to happen. And it's really the few, not the many, unfortunately, that I think are still in the realm of reactive rather than as proactive as they could be. It's picking up, it's increasing, but we're still got a long way to go in order to really be driving this, I'd say both from a security perspective, which I haven't focused on as much in a decade, but certainly in the privacy perspective, we're playing whack-a-mole for things that happened in the past that we're planning to catch up with, rather than the laws and regulations that are currently here or what's in the future, let alone the IT infrastructure that underlies everything.
Okay. You mentioned Target. There's also, almost a daily reporting of data breaches and vulnerabilities being discovered and the like. Are there particular industries that you see really focusing more on this? I mean, certainly, Target was a shot across the bow for a lot of folks in kind of very consumer-facing retail. You would assume that certain industries have a higher sort of higher bar to clear for themselves in terms of security concerns. But are there some areas where you see either they're doing it really well or others where it's still kind of folks waiting for that lightning bolt, as you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sectors that you typically expect are the ones that are much further ahead. And that always starts like where the money is, right? So financials have, from my initial days at VeriSign all the way back in 99, were the first ones you approached with any of these related issues, because they have a lot of data on any and all of us. And candidly, it's oftentimes tied to one of our most sensitive topics, which is financial. If you follow that same thesis of massive amounts of consumer related data and a sensitive topic, you immediately then go to health. And as we look at those two segments, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, you typically hold yourself to a higher bar, have more programmatic ways of doing this. And oftentimes the complexity of how you do that is tremendous with very large teams that is all that they focus on. And so that's kind of one bucket that I put, and I'm ignoring, the real extreme things like 3-letter government agencies and, things like that. So if we're talking general corporate world, those are two that are far and above at the top. And that really doesn't only permeate the kind of what they think about in terms of understanding their data and understanding kind of how it flows and thinking about the risks that are out there externally from a hacker threat or the compliance risks from a regulation. It's also how they structure things, right? And some of these entities are beholden based on laws to have certain organizational structures where someone with a compliance title reports to the CEO or has a reporting relationship to the board of directors, depending on where you are. So those two, certainly the highest. I think what we've seen from the breaches, and the reason I always like to pick a Target was, at the time, it was kind of one of those that was a surprise in the sense of a Marriott, but once you thought about how much data they had, and as a consumer of both of them, particularly like Marriott, all my stays, all my locations, all the credit cards they've had, and like where they knew where I was roughly at what time, it's really when the bad things happen that you start to think about how much information someone really has about a consumer, or sometimes even B2B partnerships. We shouldn't just limit this to consumers, but I think those are the two top industries. Doing the best, thinking about it the best, have the most complicated infrastructures, but also the most complicated methods to try and solve this, and are kind of cutting edge in terms of how they think about it. With right below that being, and sometimes equal to that, tech companies that just focus on the data, whose whole business is based on the data. But then there's a pretty big drop kind of to everyone else. The one other segment that I'd say that's interesting, and I actually saw it accelerate last year, in our space with obviously the mess that we've had with COVID over the last year, you've seen that really stymie a lot of people's ability to invest in certain things. But because we are so remote, and because so many things are just unexpected in terms of what it has caused from a remoteness and remote work, but also how you run your business and what that means for your business, the need to get these things right in that environment, it's been one of the key areas that, whether it's privacy around employee issues, which we didn't used to think about, but how do you ask employees health questions to come in, and what do you do with that information? How do you protect it and think about it? Or how you deal with the same issues because you now have to run your business online and you didn't before, and that digital transformation just got accelerated at so many companies around the globe that if it wasn't a key priority in the past, it was now. So it'll be interesting to see how that second tier accelerates up into getting more mature, but it's pretty immature out there still collectively.
Mm-hmm. We have a question, and let me just remind folks, there's a Q&A, should be a Q&A button for you to be able to ask a question. Please take advantage of that. If there are any thoughts or issues on your mind that you want us to discuss, please include them. We already actually have one question sort of talking a bit about what you were alluding to there, Chris, the challenge of an organization that has, may have a long history and an ethos around data protection and strong data governance, may even have regulatory requirements around certain structures and activities in the organization. And this sort of brings up the question of privacy and security as sort of overlapping Venn diagram pieces or two sides of the same coin. Do you see it in leveraging your background in security as well as your current role focused more on privacy? How do you see those two interacting in addressing the kind of risk that we see, particularly as companies become more and more dependent on cloud applications, on APIs moving a lot of their sensitive data around? How do you see those two working together?
Yeah, it's tricky and complex. I think one of the things that I would always say to start with is, you have to start. If you have a blank slate, start with security. If you don't have your front door locked and everyone can come in and grab all your data, like the fact of whether you're meeting Gdpr compliance requirement, I mean, it is a part of that requirement, but it's there foundational because you got to start with security and make sure that things are protected and safe. Once you've done that, and we also know that you're never done, right? Like you are never complete in that challenge. That's when you really can start to focus on the privacy related issues. Because to me, it's kind of like you're locking down the information, making it secure, making certain you have a good sense for where it is, how it's moving on, et cetera. Privacy questions are kind of more of like, I'd like to use this data to X. Is that okay? Can I do that? Should I do that? And I use both of those words because one is a can, compliance, check the box. Should is a little bit sometimes more, did I collect it under the same expectations that I'm trying to now use it? And that's when you move kind of sometimes out of the kind of hardcore IT to this kind of policy, compliance, privacy officer, legal realm. And that's honestly one of the areas that I see being a big challenge. And it's a challenge because you've got in security, and again, I'll make these comparisons, 20 years ago when I was focused on security, you at least within an IT group, you were putting in your first devices. You were starting with firewalls, and then maybe intrusion detection, and then it was, endpoint security with antivirus, and then you should do network security scans, and you should do application security scans, and what about these other endpoints, and what about data at rest and encryption, and you ended up having all these different buckets, but you needed it to come together comprehensively. But everyone spoke kind of tech. In this realm, when you think about it, it's kind of like men are from Mars, women are from Venus in the book, in the sense that like you've got lawyers trying to talk policy issues to technologists, and technologists wanting to understand what they think are pretty simple questions. And one I like to pick and say really simply is, I've collected this data. You say that we should delete it at some point in the future. Is that a week, a month, or a year? And the lawyer will respond, well, what's the adequate amount of time that you think is reasonable for the, and it's like, I need a number, like days, months, years. I need a number and a like, what category of time are you talking about? And that has made this very challenging. Some things are fundamental to both, meaning if you don't understand what data you have, who has access to it, who you're sharing it with, or how you got it from someone sharing it with you, if you don't understand that base level of data inventory and data flow, you're going to be bad at security, and you're going to be bad at privacy. And it still shocks me how difficult that is for many, many companies with the proliferation of, all of the cloud-based applications. That's a difficult thing. With the ability to download subsets of data from any of these applications, whether it be cloud-based or enterprise-based, and it kind of sits in an unstructured repository that's difficult to find in your organization. That is still an unbelievably difficult challenge that really rests in the heart of IT to solve, but its use case is incredibly beneficial to both sides of this equation. And so those are some of the high level things that we just see in answering your question, and the one that's asked is, they're very closely related, but we're speaking different languages with kind of different cadences, with different levels of comfort with gray area. Privacy has a lot of gray area. When I started and switched from security to privacy, I was kind of like, you know, you kind of have a secure nod and a gray area that you're always trying to eliminate, but it's narrow, and that's your next task. And how do you make yourself safe? And then you tackle the next one. And I tried to apply that same thing to privacy, and it's just, there's way more gray area. There's way more softness in the requirements, which makes it difficult to automate, to scale. And it involves policy decisions mirroring with IT decisions, and people speak in different languages to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. No, that really resonates. I remember years ago in a big project, talking with a CISO at a major healthcare and biosciences tech firm, who really focused on the fact that they were trying to sort of get the privacy responsibilities out of the security organization, because he said there were too many soft answers in the privacy world, that he wanted hard answers. And, you know, I know there are folks who will object to this characterization, but there's a lot about the security world that is checklist driven. You know, do you have certain controls? Have you met certain bars and requirements? Is your key length above a certain, size, et cetera? Where you, in the privacy space, you get those answers of, well, it depends, what is reasonable. It also, can trigger things based on or be driven by business requirements. So, we need this data, like the GDPR talks about sort of maintaining data for a reasonable period of time needed to achieve the function that you collected the data for in the first place. Well, what is that reasonable amount of time? How long do you really need to keep that? And then feeding that into an IT structure that can then, code, a cron job that will say, all right, delete any record after, older than a certain date or a certain time. It's what you say there, that kind of play between, the hard answers, the soft answers, the squishy legal, and oftentimes gray area compliance issues are pretty difficult. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say just one thing you said there that triggered a thought, and it's this idea of, is it compliance or is it risk? And I may have a different view than many, but I feel like the security ecosystem over the last 25 years, right, has kind of gone through this phase that I'll call, I mentioned just quickly a whole bunch of areas that we focused on solving insecurity, but at some point we realized that, wow, I'm playing whack-a-mole. I keep adding these different technologies. If I don't pull them together comprehensively and programmatically, I again will never win, because I might be over raising something to this level when everything else is down here, and that's not where I need to be. I need to kind of have this clear level across all these different types of infrastructure, right? And types of security methods, if you will. And I feel like if you play that analogy, we're kind of in that same 20 years ago maturity phase in privacy. So what do I mean? There are a whole host of privacy laws that for the most part people ignored. So while I've been doing this for 10 or 11 years, I would say the privacy market was mostly uninteresting for my first 7. And when GDPR passed and when it started to ramp, and that started in kind of 16, but obviously people who were in it knew that the date was May 25 of 2018. But that date drove a whole set of effort. And that effort was around being compliant with a law, right? And to me, that felt a lot like kind of the initial push for Sarbanes-Oxley, post-Enron and all those blowups of like, okay, I need to hit this. And what we threw at it was a ton of time, a ton of effort, a ton of energy, a ton of consulting, candidly, a little bit of technology. We wanted a lot more, but we got to the date. And we woke up at that date and we said, wow, I've got this great report, but it isn't based in tech and it isn't repeatable. And how the hell am I going to go do that? And that's when the GRC market from there started and kind of built out to systematize this, to automate this, et cetera. But it was still attacking for GDPR a law. And we built out kind of Gen 1, a set of technologies, and there was a bunch of us that were kind of early in that market. And Gen 1 helped you be compliant with a law. But in the same way that you went from needing a firewall to intrusion detection to endpoint and pulled it together programmatically, the equivalent in privacy is California Consumer Privacy Act came along. And while some things were very similar, you need to be able to take from a data subject such as myself. Chris Babel comes to the site and says, please give me all the information about myself. And if I'm a European, I fall under GDPR guidelines. And if I'm based in California, I fall under a different set of guidelines. And simple things I like to pick is, if I'm European, you've got 30 days to respond. If I'm based in California, you've got 45 days to respond. What most people don't know is in October of 2019, the Nevada law went into effect that everybody ignores, has the same requirement, and you have 60 days to respond. So as you think about what technology you deploy, it needs to be smart enough to understand the laws and pull it in. But if you are focused on compliance and just compliance and checking each of these individual boxes, what some companies literally started to do is build a system to do it for GDPR. And then they're like, we now need to build a system to do it for CCPA. And obviously you wouldn't do that on something like this. But when it comes to like asking, because a lot of this is still done in privacy based on assessments, asking people in your business organization to use data this way or that way because it hasn't been able to be automated with the technology that's deeply embedded inside an organization's infrastructure yet. When you ask that same question for 5 different laws, all the same way, you're solving for compliance. You're not solving for risk. You're not thinking about things systematically. You're checking boxes rather than being strategic. And the challenge that I very much see is security's move through that. While some people are still dealing with tactics and compliance, we've gotten more programmatic, we've gotten more strategic. We're trying to look forward and see what the threat is in front of us as opposed to catch up with the stuff that's behind us. The privacy, for the most part, is we're reviewing a lot of these things at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the biggest incoming we had in Q4 was for people trying to have cookie consent up on their European websites they should have had up in 2012. And why? Because they had all slapped banners up there and there was a court case a year ago that said that banner isn't enough. People are like, I need to change it. You've actually half-assed it for 8 years, haven't gotten it right. A court case now a year and a half ago says you haven't gotten it right and you're getting to it now.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things we're still dealing with. So thinking about it strategically across an organization with a risk mindset, as opposed to a check the box compliance mindset, is something I think that we've started to do quite well in security and are still really struggling to do on the privacy side of the equation.
Well, that brings me to another good point and a question for you about sort of how you communicate that risk to to your stakeholders, to your executives and boards. Unfortunately, you may need to explain risk and remediation choices to regulators as well. How do you go about sort of understanding, maybe even quantifying the risk in a way that you can communicate that to the stakeholders to sort of get them out of that, oh, let's slap something up and hold our breaths until, until a court case or a regulator makes us do something different?
Yeah, and I think this is hard because it's in some cases, I've shared this in the past, so I don't think some of my investors would be upset, but it was really funny to see when GDPR came, right? Because they'd invested in the company, they believed in the story, but they'd never hear about privacy or privacy issues in any of their other portfolio companies. GDPR comes and all of a sudden it's a board level topic in all the meetings and that it's this big issue for even small startup tech companies. How are we going to deal with it? So, you finally had your investors super excited about what you were doing, even more so than normal, which was great. But I think one of the interesting things relates to, you have to grab the bull by the horns and use it as a way to educate your board. Because if you don't, you are going to get the wrong questions. You're going to get the compliance questions. And again, my parallel there is 20 years ago when security issues started to become much more widespread. And the thing I always go back to is like the NIMDA virus that came out soon after 9/11, while it wasn't that much worse than Code Red, right? It was something that like all of us who were out there, and depending on your age, you may or may not remember this, right? But like our email boxes were full for days of this thing just blasting the web. It didn't do anything that bad, but it just kept circulating based on a bunch of vulnerabilities in Outlook code. And it had a bad payload that would have really been disastrous. And that, coupled with, I think, 9/11 sensitivities, caused the level of the security game to go up. And you'd go into board meetings and the board would come in and say, are we secure? How do you answer that? No. You don't want to answer that no. You have to start to train and teach about risk, right? Because you're never a true yes. But your answer better not be no. And the question is, we are here. It is a curve. It never ends. We are going to get here. We are going to get here. And it is that how you move from reactive to proactive, how you have a good sense for your data and what it is, how you have a good sense for what the laws are, how those two apply, and help you build that strategic roadmap for how you deal with these things. It's going to start manual in many instances. I can't tell you how many companies are still doing all this in Excel. Like when I talk to the guys at Microsoft, I'm literally like, you are the biggest privacy provider because you have Microsoft Word and Excel. That's still the case so often. It's shocking to me. But the reality is you're going to evolve from that to deploying technology, to deploying more sophisticated technology, because just like security, it needs to be automated, scaled, tackle the next one. Automated, scaled, tackle the next one. And the things that are just blowing up right now is data usage, particularly with digital transformation, which is all about movement to the cloud, movement to APIs, greater connectivity, and these issues keep coming up and again and again. So when it comes to executive boards, partners, regulators, the key is to have a good sense for where you are, outline where that is, pick a methodology that you're going to use, follow, whether that's a framework, whether that's a set of risk metrics, right? And show progress. Lead the way. Don't be dragged into a conversation where you aren't the leader, because that's going to start with the question of, I'm certain we're compliant with GDPR and CCPA, right? That's probably not where anyone is right now, especially since those aren't all totally defined yet. And you know, one of the questions, sorry, I'm just going to pick one of these off that Bill asked, right? Like, I'll just answer it with, I have no idea. And by the way, no one else does either. So if you can see his question, it's a question about, you know, GDPR requires encryption of data at rest, and you know, you don't have to report a breach if it doesn't trigger, and does this type of encryption work or not? No regulator has said that's okay. No regulator has said it isn't okay. It comes down to a risk decision for you as a company to say, this is what we think is best. This is what we put in place. But there is no map for that yet as to whether level A, level B, level C is okay or not. And it will come down to someone having an issue, saying that that's what they've done, and a regulator either saying, yeah, that's good enough, I'm not going to push it further. Or people saying, that's not enough. And that's what makes this so hard, exciting because it's early, but challenging for us to get our arms around. And that's a risk decision that each company needs to make. And my answer to you would be like, well, what's the data that's in there? Because even under GDPR, there's sensitive data, there's critical data, there's different levels of data, and you could even apply it in different ways across the types of data that you have. And that's an individual company decision based on your risk profile. So a little bit maybe off the rails there in terms of your board question, but I'm trying to incorporate in a couple of the other questions here as well, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all you know, a part of a, you know, of a larger piece. I think, you know, having had some uncomfortable questions from, you know, from boards in some of my roles, you know, you get either the board, you know, the board member or the audit committee asking those sorts of tough questions that. If they're coming from a place of not being very well informed, not having been sort of primed with the right information, with a steady flow of sort of metrics and, you know, here was the problem, here was how we remediated it, here was the result, here were the, you know, residual risks and the questions that we pose to leadership around what risks will continue to accept, what risks are going to be just a part of doing business. These are, you know, giving boards, giving executives, giving customers a steady flow of information so that they can set expectations, so that they can understand the context of your solutions, and then particularly being able to document that and back that up when a regulator comes knocking. I think you're absolutely correct in sort of reinforcing the need for that to be very organized and structured, and to show, you know, the diligence that's needed to sort of confidently answer that question. You won't have 100% security, you won't have 100% privacy, but you can have a reasonable approach. And that sort of brings me to kind of a more of an operational question. You know, everyone talks about sort of balancing risks and sort of weighing the trade-offs of certain approaches or technologies and being able to defend those. In the world of cloud applications, in the world where you need to build APIs and distributed data systems to be able just to sort of do business, to build a business today. Nobody's building massive data centers, except except those whose business is providing data centers. How do you sort of how do you balance those risks? I mean, at a certain point, you're kind of stuck with Salesforce, Marketo, ServiceNow. You're stuck with I need to build these APIs to connect to my partners. So we're just going to have to live with a certain amount of risk. How do you sort of measure that and get a level of comfort with what is going to be just sort of an ongoing residual risk?
Yeah, no, this is a difficult question. Again, let me draw some parallels, right? And I speak on this as a vendor having to deal with it from customers, right? If I go back to like the security realm, and certainly we're not a big vendor like any of these that you just mentioned, right? But I think about every single sales cycle I go through, I'm answering a set of security assessment questionnaires, right? Every single time, because everything we do is a SaaS service, right? And I can tell you some of the companies that we're trying to sell to have 30 questionnaires, and the biggest we've had was 997, because it came in 4 pieces that overlapped in some cases, didn't overlap in other cases, but were from each of the regions of the world that this business operated, and they operated very kind of independently in their silos, right? And so like the equivalent, how have we solved it in security? We've asked people the questions, we've tried to validate that as best we could through kind of forcing people through a maze of questions that has evolved over time to be, well, I've got a SOC 2 and does that cover some of these things? And you see the industry getting together and trying to get to like a shared security assessments model. We're not there, and it's been an effort for what, 10, 15 years. I'm dating myself here, but maybe even longer. And that's still doing it from a question answer perspective, not like I have a API agent that knows what data zips in and out and can help manage that. But even once it's there, if it disappears out the back, the example we always gave is company might say they're doing all the right things. You might monitor your interface with them, but if they're printing CDs and shipping them out the back end of all of your data, what are you going to do about it? Obviously, you talk then about encrypting it. At the point is, this is not yet solved in security. It's difficult. It's painful. It's certainly the same in privacy, but it gets you back to the same point, which is know where you are, understand where your biggest risks are around the data that you have and the regulations that you're focused on, because there will be more regulations that apply to you than you will focus on. Once you have those 2 in mind, start by knocking down and trying to lessen those risks and just show the track record of having analyzed it and systematically gone after it. It'll likely be a bunch of things manual to start. You'll automate with technology components, either from a bigger privacy company like us or the hundreds of small startups that are now out there that solve the specific needs that you're trying to solve. But it's only through that, which is the same as what we did in security: identify a problem, scale a solution, automate a solution, manage that, go tackle the next problem, and to do it systematically. And I think the question that came up, I think that got voted up here from Kieran around frameworks, is you're starting to see those. Whether that be some standards that are kind of finally popping up in privacy, they're not oftentimes linked yet to security. So that's an area I think that needs continued work, but you're seeing it at AICPA level. We have our own set of frameworks that we tie all the regulations to and then apply to any customer in the system to allow them to scale across laws, do something once and have it apply many times. Ray, you even in this space are better than I in terms of what the frameworks and standards are that people are starting to adopt and use. And you got to kind of watch them and evolve with them and adapt with them and think about ourselves, if you have focused in security, of like, it's 20 years ago, it's 2001. And if you have that mindset, that will help you not be as frustrated as you might otherwise be.
Got it. Yeah, I was also going to ask you really quickly, sort of about that framework that was sort of leading. Your answer was leading me towards having those twitching moments, thinking about building frameworks. I know it was actually, I was thinking back, is about this time last year that TrustArc acquired Nimity, and very well known in the space for sort of an accountability framework that basically helps an organization figure out all of the laws and requirements, but also just sort of the best practices and the sense of as one of our questioners calls, just sort of doing the right thing. Can you tell me about how sort of a company really thinks about its responsibilities? There's the checklist, there's the compliance components, but if a company is going to really get ahead of privacy concerns, and really sort of go away from that reactive, waiting for the lightning to strike situation to really managing these issues and to being further along the what they call the maturity model in the privacy space, where you are optimizing your systems, you're having feedback, et cetera, and building and iterating on these solutions. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of those sorts of frameworks and having a real sort of a plan for how to assess risk in a structured way and then solve it in a structured way that's more than just checking the box?
Yeah, and I think this is where, again, the maturity phase that we're hitting, the first phase was, this law applies to me. This law has 50, statutes to it. I've had a lawyer analyze those 50 things and said, I need to do these 100 things to meet them. Let's go do 100 things, or document 100 things, or have a policy on 100 things, or have a piece of technology that allows us to, check a box on one of these items. And that's how they were managed. The problem was when you had 2 or 3 or 4 laws, or candidly, when that first law, like GDPR, there are some elements that we're still waiting on better guidance. Back to the question around, does this type of encryption work or not? Like, we'd all love to get that guidance from them. I don't know if we ever will, except in maybe a decision or an enforcement action. But certainly people in the field will write about saying that's good enough or bad enough that you could use as ammo to back you up. But you need to not think about these in terms of meeting a law or a requirement. You need to think about it from this framework approach. And it's what we've done in security. And it's what we have to do in privacy to be successful at this, because it is the only way to really allow technology to get in there and help you scale and drive ROI and drive efficiency and drive better risk management, right? And that automation is what is going to let that gap of 20 years between security and privacy hopefully narrow, so that they are more equivalently deployed. And so to me, and I can talk about our framework, but I'll try to generalize the idea of having a method that you are trying to meet that can apply to both the laws that you are concerned about today, or even a best practice that you are concerned today, an ISO standard, an AICPA, set of framework requirements, whatever it may be. How you get systematic about doing that and saying, because I've solved for this control that meets these 17 law requirements and these 27 citations, and when that law changes and GDPR has an enforcement action that says, ooh, wow, they meant security meant that rather than this, and that homomorphic encryption doesn't work anymore, that whatever system you're using says, ooh, law, interpretation of law changed, fires back through the system and gives you exactly where you need to go to try to improve something. And that will never happen if we don't get to these framework components. Because we'll be playing whack-a-mole forever. So it starts with understanding what you're trying to achieve as a business and how the laws and the data that you're trying to mesh together to use that data to safely go achieve your business objectives, coalesce, get a starting point on where you are and think about where you want to be. But taking that framework approach, embedding it in every manual effort you do, every assessment you might send out and ask someone a question on, every technology piece that you bring into the puzzle, is what is going to allow you to scale this effort.
We got a question from someone named Ian McPherson, who is clearly a very sketchy individual. So I joke because Ian's an old colleague of both of ours from TrustArc, and he actually asks a very prescient question and feeds into what you were talking about, which is that you build a program, you do your risk assessments, you conduct all of your, the components of a compliance and privacy risk management program. How do you sort of demonstrate that either in the market, or I would say also, how do you demonstrate that to your own stakeholders? How do you get credit for all of that effort? It ties into sort of the long history of security, where the best investments in security show only in how quiet it is, rather than having some big metrics. It can be hard to find those metrics. So how do you get credit for sort of doing all of these right things?
Yeah, and that's always an interesting question. You're right, in these industries where us here in privacy and in security, where success is nothing bad happens, right? As opposed to something good might happen, which then gets you to what was the effort to get to that good, and how do you measure whether you were successful and efficient and effective in doing that, right? And I'll just give some examples. And again, sorry if these are specific, but it's the type of customers that we work with, and we put in these types of platforms to help them both understand the law, apply it to their data, tell them what to do, have a system that allows for that to happen, allow for other technology companies to add technology to it in kind of an ecosystem way, such that we can drive through partnership to actually go do true automation, where you started with a bunch of manual things where you're literally reading a law, reading a citation, saying go do X, going to try and do X by asking people questions, and the manual effort and frustration around doing that in time sync. And we're getting people coming back and saying we're seeing 70, 80, 85% ROI, and we're not brain damaging our business units that want to make, and this is just cost savings equivalent, labor reduction. This isn't we're actually doing a better job. This isn't marketing wanted to think about using data in a campaign this way versus that way, and it used to take me a week to go figure it out because I'd have to go look it up and read blah, 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 and ask my legal team, and they had a 48-hour SLA. It's like, I looked in the platform and it said, go ahead. And the answer was like automated in 10 seconds, right? Those are the types of things that really can help you internally try to justify the investment, right? There's always the, company X got hit by the lightning bolt and we didn't. That makes you feel good and know that you didn't have that as an issue, or maybe that you need to go patch that really quickly if you did have that issue and you just didn't get the lightning bolt. But it's more these things of time, efficiency, decision-making, ability to use data in ways that you used to think the answer was no, and now the answer is yes, that enables the business to go do what they want to do, so that you're not the office of no, you're the enabler of yes. Those are the types of things that we're seeing. And back to one of the earlier questions, which is this kind of doing the right thing element too, is what's interesting to me. And I go back to, I think it was CES 2 years ago, where the big talk of the town was Apple's here. They've never been at CES, and they weren't there. They just had a billboard out in front that basically said, we're better at privacy than Google and Amazon. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what it said. And if you're driving around the Bay Area right now, coming in and out of the city, the billboards that used to be from Apple that were, iPhone 10's better than anything else, and then the next one was the Pixel 4 is better. They're now saying, like, we're better at privacy and we care more about you, the consumer, right? And so not only are companies doing this to try and be efficient at checking the box, to move from checking the box to managing risk to meet their business needs and objectives and risk profile, and putting in the technology to scale it, make it more ROI friendly, have better answers. They're also starting to feel confident enough in it that they're better than others to go out there and put a stake in the ground and say, we're better, use our stuff. And that to me is really interesting. That is that is a big statement. And I think you're seeing that certainly with Apple versus Google. But I've also started to see it in some segments that this group may not see, ad networks that say, we're not going to actually use every last bit of data that we possibly can and absorb it. we're going to differentiate on using data that is very much curated in this way that will be more safe for my customers to use and run ad campaigns on, right? And they're starting to get some traction as the worries of what the data quality or source might be in some of these data sets. So it's starting to happen. Is it super early? Yeah, it's super early. But it's becoming a differentiator that is touted. And just one last piece of that, and I'm at this point rambling, but people oftentimes ask me, when companies buy privacy applications from you, that must be because they're so scared of the regulator. But why are they so scared? Because probability of fine of 4% of revenue from Gdpr times 0.0001% chance that you get hit by the lightning bolt means you should spend $10 on that. And if you spend more than $10, that's a dumb decision. But the reason I see more and more companies doing it is because they're worried about the consumer pressure and the choice that someone would make of Apple versus Google. Other things, you know, obviously important in how you like the phone and whatnot. But it's even more on like the B2B side. The fact that privacy language is in almost every NDA that you have out there, and certainly every contract that you're signing, from a business partnership, from a vendor sell to another business perspective, like that's actually where the pressure is. The pressure is, if something goes wrong in this kind of supply chain of data, here's clearly where it's your fault and here's clearly where it's my fault. And that's actually where there's more pressure right now, in my opinion, on companies to get this stuff right. It's not the small probability of regulator fine, although it's an issue. It's more the, back to, I think, Ronald's point of like the doing the right thing, the I can contractually commit to these things in a B2B or B2C way that's driving much more of this. So.
Yeah, that certainly tracks with my experience. You know, prior to coming to Data Secrets, I was Chief Privacy Officer at Blackhawk Network, a financial technology firm, and a lot of our privacy program was sort of built around not just maintaining compliance, but being able to articulate the parameters of our program and our capabilities to measure and monitor and keep up to date, to react to, data access requests coming from customers and whatnot. And that was all driven by the requests, those questionnaires that you mentioned from the customers, their due diligence process, and in fact, more than a few occasions, we got questionnaires sent through the TrustArc privacy platform from customers who were, wanted to hear us how we answered all of these issues, and made sure that we uploaded our copies of our Article 30 reports for GDPR, detailing all of our major data processes, so that they could, I don't know what they were doing with that information, but somebody told them that it needed to be in the file, it needed to be attached to the agreement. And indeed, what used to be just a paragraph in an agreement has turned into an entirely separate document, a data processing addendum with multiple parts and additional addenda if you're using EU data, and the Brazil addenda, and the Argentinian standard contractual clauses, and all of those pieces, and they're all adding up to sort of a package of responses and solutions that a company needs to have, not because a consumer is knocking on the door, and maybe not because a regulator is, but your customer is not going to sign that agreement, not going to pay for your product until they have satisfied all of those questions. So that definitely resonates from a very practical perspective. As we sort of close in towards the top of the hour here, wanted to just sort of ask you kind of where you think we're going. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in the privacy tech market. There's companies that are sort of rebranding their GRC tools and their security control architectures as a privacy solution. TrustArc has the unique experience of having been around for more than 20 years, but really focused, in the last, 7 years or so on this sort of privacy automation and a platform for addressing these issues. And you've obviously had a lot of success with building that platform, and I'll take as much credit as you'll give me on that piece.
Absolutely.
But so I guess, how does it feel to be an overnight success, and where are things where are things going in this industry and around these kinds of solutions for what are clearly continuing and evolving problems?
Yeah, if this is an overnight success, I'd hate to see what like a week looks like. No, I digress. But I think at the highest level, a couple things we know to be true. Data is going to continue to explode. It will only increase in value. Our ability to save it, store it, and analyze it is going to continue to increase. And that will allow for more things to occur, better services, better help around health and an IoT device, a whole bunch of better, to stop there. What we also know to be true is we right now in the systems, as you mentioned from NIMITY, where we had a research team of legal people that analyzed laws, we right now have 1,040 laws globally, which is basically federal laws in every country and state laws in the US and Canada, 1,040 laws and growing that we have mapped by citation, by line item in terms of what its requirements are in and against like this framework. Not that all of you need to worry about complying with all of those because they may not apply to you, but that number is increasing. There was 30 laws last year at a global scale that we added to that. That's even in a COVID year where everyone else was distracted. You've already got Virginia, Washington State back on the books. You've got real talk of federal law in the US with China and India having laws in process. Like half of the world's population will likely by the end of 2021 be under a federal privacy law. So that's what's happening in that ecosystem. The ecosystem that we care about is like, how do we solve that problem to leverage that data against that legal and regulatory framework to drive value for our business users so that they can go be as successful as possible. And that's what's exciting to me. I literally just yesterday got interviewed by the IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals, organization that trains privacy pros like Ray. 5 years ago, they launched the first vendor report and there were 50 companies in it. And they're launching another version. Don't think of it as a Forrester Wave rating. Think of it as a directory. Here's companies that do technology against these sectors. And when they started, there was 50 companies in probably 5 sectors. And today there's, I think, something like 20 sectors and 300 plus companies in it, right? And yes, some of them are a security company with a good product marketing person that's masquerading as a privacy application, right? But the bigger reality is the amount of funding that has gone into this because the problem has exploded in terms of its size and there is no end in sight. What that excites me is companies like Data Secrets, a whole host of different companies that can get deeper in and truly help automate. Because what we've gone from is law with lawyer and person asking question to Gen 1 of technology, which help people solve for a law, but still through asking questions. The next gen is framework based, multiple laws, and more automation. I can look at a data repository and determine what's in it and try to do the discovery and classification that I should have always done. Monitoring the APIs to understand data and how it's moving around an organization, what its true lineage is. Applying that in an automated way against this legal regulatory framework that says, oop, I should do this. And rather than asking people if they've done it, look into our systems and either program it to be done going forward or know that it has been done in the past and that you're good. And we have a lot of automation to push through the IT infrastructure to really help with this, and a very long runway and a ton more companies to build, create, and grow. And that's what's candidly exciting about the ecosystem. And so I think that while I've been at it for 11 years and the company's been at it for 20 years, it feels like it's about the second or third inning. If you follow the baseball analogy, because it's still really early in terms of the value that can collectively be provided to businesses to solve these problems.
Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your insights today. Chris Babel, you can find him at trustarc.com. I'm Ray Everett, and you can find me and my company at datasecrets.io. And let me hand it back to Ravi and Maddie.
Thank you, Chris and Ray for this event, and thank you, Maddie, for help organizing this. Maddie?
Thank you all for joining us. A huge thanks to our speakers, Ray and Chris. I hope you all learned so much more about data and privacy and all that goes into making all of it work. I know I sure did. And thank you all again for joining us. Please sign up for the Hive Think Tank on Meetup and come to our next event. We can't wait to see you guys there. This session will be sent out to you guys tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.